Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Mac Observer Show. I am your host, Ken Ray, joined today by Richard Gunther. He is a product experience consultant. He is the co-host of the Smart Home Show. He is the host of Home On, a show about DIY smart home products and technology. He and I have been talking about smart technology for so long, and I remember even when I was younger, I was a crouchy old man about this stuff. Now that I've gotten older, I'm actually kind of curious. And so we turn today to Richard Gunther. First of all, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today.
I'm very glad to be here. How are you doing, Ken?
Fine.
All right.
That's really all anybody needs to know. Yeah. I mean, we'll, move on from there, because by the time they see this, who knows how the answer will have changed. All right. So let's just dive in, because I joke about the fact that I know nothing about smart home stuff, and it's not really a joke. I mean, there's very little that I know. I have concerns about security. I have concerns about the technology itself. I have concerns about, will this thing work with that thing? And that's kind of where we're going to start today, just sort of smart homes or, piles of smart devices in general, and then we'll work our way towards Apple. But just talk to me about that, first of all. I mean, is there really any such thing as a smart home, or is it just, well, I got a garage door opener that does one thing, I got a blender that does another, and I don't even know what my washer is up to? I mean, is there really a smart home at this point, or are we talking about a bunch of things that might one day all kind of work together, sort of?
So how much money do you have to spend, Ken?
Is that it? Is that really it?
Yeah, it really comes down to that. What I think we're seeing right now is this weird area where we have all of these smart home products that have become just a general staple. They're commodities now in the big box stores and at Amazon. Things like smart light bulbs and smart switches and smart speakers, and everything's smart and everything's connected, and all of this stuff is just ubiquitously available. And it's cheap compared to what this stuff used to cost. Now, when I say what it used to cost, people who had these types of technology several decades ago were spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, to have all the things in their home, their lighting and their audio and their home theater and everything, all working together and connecting together. And even then, maybe even talking to you. That still exists. That's still possible. What's different now is that we have all these products available to us directly. So we can go out and spend $25 for a connected multicolor light bulb, but how smart is it going to be? And is it going to actually react to anything else going on in your home? Depends on how much money you're willing to spend and how much work you're willing to put into it.
Now, is that the kind of thing that you go for, the thing that's smart on its own? I mean, because I'll let people in on a secret. 3 minutes before we started recording, I moved my hand in a way that my camera started going, oh, you want to do this? And started doing this thing that I had to go then into settings and try to figure out how to not do that, all because I had accidentally made some gesture with my hand. Do you look for the kind of thing that is smart on its own? It's going to try to anticipate what Richard is going to do. Or do you look for the kind of thing that's just smart enough to do exactly what you want it to when you, say, hit a scene in Apple's Home app or something like that? And we'll get to Apple's Home app in a bit.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't often get the opportunity to talk about myself in third person, but I'm going to do that now. So Richard is a control freak.
Oh.
And Richard doesn't really like the idea of some AI or some algorithm or some supposedly smart aspect of a product taking control of whatever the thing is supposed to do. Classic example of that. I bought a Nest thermostat when it first came out, 10 years ago now. Great device. They just announced a brand new one a couple days ago. Already pre-ordered it. Love these things. They learn how you use them, and then they automatically set things for you based on that behavior. I don't want that. Now, a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of that because they don't want to have to worry about, oh, well, on this day, I want it set to this temperature and I want that to change every day at such and such a time. I'm a control freak. These products, if they're good products, can do both. They can do a little bit of thinking for you and have the smarts to do what they anticipate you want, or let you really control how you want to use them.
Okay. So let's talk then about. That's interesting though, because the way you say it, it almost sounds like then you would not need a home to be, or all the devices in a home to be on one platform. Now maybe I'm thinking like too old fashioned to think, well, if it doesn't match with this, it doesn't matter with, or it doesn't match with this. I see. I almost ruined my own joke. I guess what I was going to ask was, does the platform matter?
Oh, nicely
See, yeah,
done
it's good if
there.
anybody knows what
Okay.
I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
we'll
it's
let
just,
people in on that. So,
yeah.
right now, we have a smattering of different platforms out there. And what does that mean? It means, well, if you buy a light bulb and you buy a smoke detector, or you have a doorbell, and maybe you also have a smart switch or something like that, these things could potentially work together if they knew how to talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But not all these devices can talk to each other. You have to spend money as a product manufacturer to get your product to work with other products. And these platforms, or means of communicating with a whole bunch of other products, make that easier for product manufacturers. So now all you have to do is decide, all right, well, am I going to support Google's platform, Apple's platform, Amazon's platform, Samsung's platform? Notice what I did there. I just listed four big, huge companies who have more or less co-opted this space. They more or less own the platforms that all this stuff runs on. And you can decide, all right, well, I'm going to get everything that works with Apple's thing. And then you look for the little made for home kit, or these days, I think they're calling it made for Apple Home label on that box. And voila, you're set. Your devices will work together so that when your doorbell goes off, that light's going to go on too, and it'll give you a visual cue that someone's at the door. That's a pretty neat thing, particularly if you have hearing difficulties. So, what happens if you buy something from Google? Is it going to work with your Apple Home? Maybe, maybe not. I mentioned that they just came out with a new version of the Nest thermostat. This version of the Nest thermostat is going to work with a new standard, a new platform called Matter. It's not really that new. It's been talked about for years
Yeah.
and has been rolling out for the last year very slowly. Well, if it works with Matter, then in theory, any other platform that supports Matter should work with it. So I should be able to connect that to my Apple Home, and everything's going to be great. So I'd be able to control it from my home app on my phone, or have visibility to it through more than just Google's own application platform,
Hmm.
which is ideally what we want, right? For this stuff to be easier, you don't have to worry about, oh, well, am I buying it for the right company's platform or not? In theory, it should all just work together. And that's the promise that Matter offers. We've yet to see whether that's really going to be the case or not. Like I said, this has been rolling out very slowly.
All right. So you've actually mentioned, we've mentioned, I think we talked about garage door openers, talked about, I know I mentioned washers. I will jokingly talk about blenders, I imagine, because that just seems like the dumbest smart thing, although you can tell me I'm wrong if you want to. I guess the question I have is, does everything have to be a smart thing? Or does everything have to be an Internet of Things thing? And I'm thinking about, well, I said blenders. What if my blender suddenly starts talking to my network? Do I now have to buy a new blender because my perfectly good blender can no longer, see? Or if I make the mistake of buying something from Matter or something that doesn't work with Matter, now my blender and my toaster can't talk to each other, and so one's got to go. I mean, how much smart stuff do we actually need? Putting "need" in quotes there. What do you look at and go, I don't need, even I, a host of two shows about smart
Right.
home stuff, don't need that to be connected to the internet.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I wish more product manufacturers were asking that question. And I can't tell you how many CESs over the past decade I've heard company after company after company saying eventually all the devices will be connected. Really? Why? Why do all the devices need to be connected? I would argue that your average consumer does not need a connected blender unless there's some utility out of that, right? What's the utility that you get by connecting a blender? Well, maybe the blender is participating in a meal prep process that requires a couple different settings for a couple different aspects of the recipe. And as you step through that online recipe, since most recipes are online now, then it could just automatically send the right setting to the blender. And all you have to do is press go, and it does what it needs to do. It dices or it slurries or whatever for exactly 30 seconds like it's supposed to. That might be useful to you depending on how much control you like to have or not. But the average person doesn't need that. Look at the connected refrigerators that we've had for 2 decades now. How much utility have they really offered? When LG first came out with a connected refrigerator, I think you could text it to find out whether the door was open. Are you kidding me? Like, is that something that I want? If the door's open and it's been open for maybe 3 minutes or more, text me. Let me know that there's something wrong. That's useful. But the thing that you talked about, you're actually talking about what happens if that connectivity goes away. Is my product bricked? It had better not be. And if it is, shame on the manufacturer. I strongly argue that anyone creating a product that adds connectivity as a plus, in other words, it's a product and it has connectivity, but it can be a product on its own without that connectivity, then you'd better not be dependent on that connectivity to just do your basic stuff. Classic example, Sonos bricking speakers when they moved to a new platform, when they moved to new technology. They said, we're just going to make these old speakers not work anymore. And customers were furious and they backtracked.
Yeah, that's not even planned obsolescence. That's just, I don't know what that is, but I mean, good, I guess, in that
Evil,
case.
greedy,
Well, okay, sure. Yeah,
ignorant.
greedy. Greedy is one thing that comes to mind. We'll just stick with that for the time being. I want to, we're going to get to Apple in just a second. I got one more question, though, and probably this is because of the security show that I do and have done for a number of years. I worry about security with all of these things.
You should.
Matter, I think, might sort of help that because it is cohesive. I remember being worried about things like, I was always afraid that my mom was going to see something like an internet connected picture frame at Walgreens and buy it and hook it into her network with not even a single thought of the security side of it. Where are we in terms of securing smart home devices and smart devices at this point? Are we to a place where people don't have to worry about it, or is the $5 bin at Walmart still a trap?
I'm going to answer the questions in reverse order.
Okay.
Don't buy the $5 connected product.
Okay.
Yes, we do still have to worry about it, but things are getting better. That's the good news. We've seen legislation pass that requires manufacturers to not rely on default passwords like password, to require the manufacturer to require its owner, the device's purchaser, to actually set a password. This was the case with routers. I mean, the most fundamental access thing in your home had default passwords set. And so we're going to see that stop because you can't do that anymore. That's a big first step, and that applies to any one of these products. You mentioned Matter and where it plays into this. One of the core tenets of Matter, that's tenets, not tenants of Matter, that's a completely different thing. The tenet regarding security is that everything that they do is built around a secure core. So very much like Apple, where Apple built HomeKit with initially a hardware secure chip that did the authentication to allow it to communicate with your devices. Now that's done through software. But that same sort of approach has been taken by the Matter group. So anything that can call itself a Matter device has to abide by that, has to use their way of that Matter's way of implementing security on the device. And that's a good thing. So if you're concerned about security, I tell people two things. One, look for Matter devices, because whether you're going to use it with other platforms or not, it's an added assurance that there's good security in it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an Apple person, you're probably better off than most, because the Apple HomeKit ecosystem is built around a very secure, I don't know if enclave is the right word, but a very secure communication mechanism. And just avoid the cheap stuff that you can get from Tuya or Alibaba or even Amazon or the Walmart $5 bin. The commodity products now are at a point where you can afford. This is easy for me to say, right? But spend the $19 on the light bulb. Don't buy the $5 light bulb.
Yeah. It's, well, there are a couple of ways I wanted to go with that. I mean, I guess one of them is, okay, there are actually five. So let's just stick to what you brought up a moment ago. I think even before I was doing the security thing, I was skeptical of some smart devices because I had some idea that, they could get into my network, or somebody through them could get into my network and, get up to some shenanigans or something. I've always been worried about stealing data, things like that. When Apple came out with their hardware authentication rather than just software authentication or no authentication, I thought, oh, well, this will be good because I trust Apple and I trust that, sort of rigor. And the only problem was it was way too expensive and it took way too long and Apple was too slow. And pretty soon Apple, not even soon enough, I don't think. I would almost say that their adherence to hardware authentication might have actually slowed the adoption of some smart home stuff, because people like me who thought,
Absolutely.
I cannot wait until that happens, found out, well, you're going to have to wait a very long time. And either
Right.
they lost interest or they just started buying stuff willy-nilly because they couldn't get the thing that they wanted. Talk to me about that switch over from hardware authentication to software authentication. And then the other thing, I just remember the other place I want to go. Remind me when you're done with this answer to come back to the point about Matter. But tell me about
Okay.
Apple's choice to go from hardware authentication to software authentication.
So first of all, I do want to comment on your thoughts about Apple's hardware approach making kind of basically being sand in the system. It did slow things down, but it was the right thing to do by implementing this very intentional, very thoughtful hardware authentication approach. They required companies to really think through and adopt secure practices with their hardware. Now, that added cost to this process. It added cost in terms of time. It added cost in terms of parts. The chip that did that was rare and more expensive. So that's why things were more expensive by the time they hit consumer shelves. And the manufacturers pushed back really hard after the first round of devices came out. And everybody was like, wow, that was really a pain to do. We have a good product now, but it's got to be easier. And put the pressure on Apple that if they were going to get more companies on board, they had to come up with a better way of doing this. So the software authentication, I believe, was largely, it was probably less for consumers and more for product manufacturers, just to make adopting Apple's platform tenable.
All right, now I know I said remind me, but I'll go ahead and remind me because I remember now. There's one thing I want to make
Okay.
clear. I want to make 100% certain, because we were talking about Matter a moment ago. Matter is not a brand. Matter is a platform under which Samsung, Amazon, Google, Apple, anybody else that comes along, IKEA, I think their
Yep.
stuff is Matter compatible, right?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, exactly.
All
So
right.
it's a standard created by all of these large companies, they got together and they said, this is ridiculous. We've got to figure out how to make this easier for manufacturers and for consumers.
Right.
So together, in unprecedented fashion, the major competitors in this space pulled together and came up with a mechanism for all these devices to work together and to be secure.
All right, so we actually sort of jumped into Apple already, talking about the hardware versus software authentication. What would you say Apple's place is, or what is the state of Apple's? How's Apple doing at this whole thing at this point? I mean, I think a long time ago, a lot of us thought this will be great. I'll get my oven from Apple. I'll get my refrigerator from Apple. I'll get my garage door opener from Apple. And Apple is still making iPhones, iPads, whatever. They're not making
Yeah,
the smart home devices themselves. They're sort of
right.
making things that plug into them and making sure that their stuff can plug into them. Not physical plug, but you get the idea.
Mhm.
What would you say is Apple's space in the smart home space, and how are they doing at it so far or to this point?
So they've had an interesting journey. When HomeKit first came out, HomeKit being their platform for the smart home, it was very bumpy. It was all done in secret. Companies weren't allowed to talk to each other when they were getting their products out, even though their products had to work with each other. So it was very challenging. And within the first couple of years, I think people looked at HomeKit as somewhat of a failure. Then, as more people came on board, largely because we now had an easier way to authenticate products. So they could get them out cheaper. More companies were producing them. And as a result, more consumers had them in their homes. Then started to become a real competitor. Now, remember, this is a competitor with with Amazon and with Google, because in the background, we had Amazon coming out with their platform, whose name I won't say, that has smart speakers that control things in your home. And Google came out with their own platform that does the same thing, the Google Assistant. And it, HomeKit was largely seen as, okay, well, this is Apple's competitor to that. And whether that was a fair comparison or not, I don't know, but that's how consumers saw it. And Apple lagged. Eventually, about maybe 3, 4 years ago, at CES, there was a real turn, and we saw nearly every manufacturer that was playing in this space start to pay attention to HomeKit, either announcing that they were adding HomeKit or that they were now HomeKit compatible or that their next devices would be HomeKit compatible. And that's a big deal because that reinforces that Apple's doing something right. And I largely think they are. They have a nice platform that is fairly easy to work with. They're not as easy to work with as the other manufacturers are in terms of getting devices certified and everything. But the platform is really robust. Devices can communicate with each other very efficiently and reliably. So I think in the past couple of years, we've seen it improve dramatically. Now you may question then, well, why aren't we hearing anything about HomeKit from Apple anymore? And these days, Apple is looking at the home more holistically. So in the last couple of keynotes, you may have noticed that they talk about home in terms of TV, audio, and smart connected devices. They're all part of the Apple home ecosystem. And in that sense, Apple is still moving things forward. They're slowly adding additional features or uh, new improvements, like the stuff that they've added to Apple TV to support smart devices is really slick. And so I think that we're seeing a maturing where there's only so much more they can do until we get a little bit more support for matter in the industry, because Apple is all in on Matter. My suspicion is that Apple's going to focus their smart home integration attention and dollars on Matter, on supporting things that that are Matter compatible, and not be so concerned about, is it specifically Apple Home compatible?
Do you think though that it, not to be, well, I'll do it anyway. Do you think it actually means that Apple is doing anything right in home? And I'm not saying they're not, or is it just that people like iPhone, people like Apple? I mean, are they doing iPhone right? And so if you want to be a player in the smart home device area, you're going to have to work with Apple, whether they're doing it well or not. I'm thinking about things like CarPlay. I don't have CarPlay. I've been in CarPlay cars before. It's fine. I like it well enough. It is possible that Rivian has a better thing. It is possible that Tesla has a better thing, but I want what I want where I want it. You have to be, I mean, I have an iPhone, so when I get in my car, I want all the stuff on my iPhone in there without having to, change anything or give other information away to anyone or sign into anything else. I want it to just work the way Apple
Yep.
says. Are they doing particularly well in the smart home space, or do people want it to work with their iPhone? So Samsung better get on board. LG better get on board.
So the work with an iPhone is an interesting slant on this. You don't have to be HomeKit compatible. You don't even have to be Apple compatible to work with iPhone. You can have an iPhone device control anything connected to the cloud, or virtually anything connected to your own in-home Wi-Fi. So I am less convinced that the draw is that, oh yeah, I like iPhone, therefore I want all this smart home stuff that can work with my iPhone. I think HomeKit in itself offers much, much more to consumers than just device compatible, like iPhone compatibility or iPad compatibility. If you
Okay.
look at the different ecosystems that the major companies are offering, one of the biggest advantages of Apple's approach is that Apple out of the gate said, all right, well, one thing that we're going to have to make clear here is that if you're going to work with our system, then I have my device, Apple's phone, or Apple's speaker, or Apple's television needs to be able to communicate with and control your device on my network without going out to the cloud. You need to be able to do everything right here in my home, because that's one of the most reliable ways of doing things, and it's one of the most secure ways of doing things. And I don't know that any other ecosystem is requiring that, is doing that right now. And that's a big draw for people who are security conscious. It's a big draw for people who are even just control freaks like Richard, that don't want all their stuff having to depend on some cloud server somewhere.
Sure.
So I think it's bigger than just, yeah, I have an iPhone, therefore I want HomeKit stuff.
I feel like Apple is kind of going, maybe more slowly would be the best way to put it, into the whole AI thing than a lot of other companies have. Their mantra is not move fast and break things, right?
Right.
So they haven't really talked, I don't think, about how Apple Intelligence might play into the smart home thing, but we're like in warm ups. We're not even in the bottom of the first as far as Apple is concerned with Apple Intelligence, artificial intelligence, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Not counting the machine learning stuff, unless the machine learning stuff is already played into it. Where does AI come into Apple and the smart home and controlling Matter devices and all of that?
Yeah. So first off, I'm bullish, meaning I'm very optimistic about Apple Intelligence. I think they've taken the right measured approach. I think they're they're brilliant avoiding the artificial intelligence terminology and branding it, making it their own. I am using the beta with the Apple Intelligence updates that they've made available so far, and I'm impressed so far. I know you were a little disappointed with what they announced, or maybe unexcited might describe how I interpreted your tone on their AI announcements. Maybe I'm misinterpreting that, but I think they, I think they're hitting all the right notes here. Now, where does this fall into HomeKit? The reality is we don't know. I perused that section of the keynote multiple times, looking for any hint of interaction with the home, and there was none. They didn't talk about it at all. They didn't even talk about whether this was going to work on your watch or on your speakers or on your TVs. So we have a long way to go. It has to work on your smart speakers for this to make sense in the Apple home ecosystem. So I think it's premature to anticipate what they're going to do there. But let me tell you, if they can make controlling things in my home as straightforward and natural as the way that I can now interact with Siri and get much more reliable results inferring from multiple places to return those results to me. If they can do that with my home when I walk into a room and say, turn on the lights, and it knows what room I'm in and what lights I mean because it's me and what time of day it is and so forth, then that's a win. And that's where I think they should be shooting.
Like, really quickly, I don't. You might remember better than I do because you listen and I live in here all the time. Michael Gartenberg said something to me amazing, said an amazing thing to me probably 15 years ago now. And what he said was, you will never, no, it was always, sorry, I'm kidding.
Very good.
He said nothing is better than the unannounced Apple product. And I think you're right. I'm probably that day I was a bit disappointed. The more I think about what Apple is doing, I appreciate their measured approach. I appreciate their going slowly. I personally think the reason that the 3 pictures that Apple is going to let you generate are going to be this thing that can't possibly look real, this thing that can't possibly look real, or this thing that can't possibly look real, because Apple doesn't want people, first of all, making deep fakes with their hardware,
Right.
but they also don't want people fearing their hardware. And so it's quite possible that Apple has an idea of how Apple Intelligence is going to play with your smart home stuff, but they don't want all the HAL 9000 jokes, immediately after. And for people who don't know, who the HAL 9000 is, what are you doing here? You should look it up because it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
All right, I got 2 more questions for you before we're out the door. What is the smartest smart home thing that you have?
This is a hard one. Probably my June oven, which is a wonderful and sad story. So this company June, that was since bought by Weber, who has now apparently discontinued the June product line,
Oh,
came out with a line of smart ovens with camera vision, or with computer vision. They had cameras in the ovens, and using some sort of AI algorithm, they could determine what was in the oven, and it would automatically cook it appropriately. If you had 5 hot dogs in there, or 37 tater tots, or 4 chicken breasts, it just knew and would automatically set it. Toast, whatever. It was amazing in terms of how accurate it was and the types of capabilities it had. And as a connected device, why do you need your oven to be connected? That was a great example. And they continued to add recipes to that over time. I don't know what's going to happen with that product line. I suspect we're not going to see any more of it, but I hope we see other appliance manufacturers intelligently apply this sort of technology to make their standard home appliances actually kind of magical. That's the kind of thing that just saves so much time. It makes people like me who can't cook actually be able to cook. So I love that thing.
And what is the dumbest smart home thing that you have?
Oh, that would be my other connected oven. So,
I'm sorry, what?
so the June oven is a countertop oven.
Yeah, okay, okay. All right, well,
I
okay, that makes more sense because seriously, man, we were going to have an intervention.
right. Okay, so now I moved into a new home that had all connected high-end like industrial appliances. Supposed to be amazing. And as appliances, they are amazing. They are connected and they're supposed to be able to do things like set their own time, which is like, why can't everything do that? I don't, everything should do that so it doesn't blink at me 12 for the rest of its life. But it could do that. It could let you start it remotely, which is interesting and dangerous. And they had lots of lawyers involved in that, so there were lots of steps. But if we lose power, nothing works on this oven until you physically go to the oven and manually set the time. So, despite all this connectivity and all the cool stuff that it can do, if you have a brownout or lose power during a storm or something, and I don't know about you, but this happens all the time in my neighborhood. So, I am constantly having to go in and set the time. It's a gas burner stove, Ken. To turn the gas burners on, I have
Yeah.
to set the time on this oven. It's insane. It gets that question of what happens if you lose connectivity. Did you just brick your device? Apparently so.
So I know I said that I had two more questions for you, but you know it's my way. I've got at least two more. Maybe your answer is going to be matter, and that's fine. When I go to IKEA, things are like, well, I know where this store is, so if something goes wrong, I could always bring it back. I know their stuff is matter compatible. That is the place, and I only get there like once or twice a year, but that is the place where I am most tempted to dabble. I would say in smart devices or a smart home device or things like that. If people are looking to get their toes wet, like how would you suggest that somebody start looking into it or start playing? I mean, do you just buy one safe device and see what that does in the Home Kit app or the Home app and all things like that? Do you take a more measured approach? I have nothing. Where do you suggest I go?
Yeah. So my recommendation here can fall into one of three areas, and it really depends on how much money you want to spend. I think the most utility that you'll get out of something, and I don't mean this as a pun, is a smart thermostat. A thermostat that can uh, work with your power company to adjust its use, perhaps based on load or how expensive the energy is at any given time. A lot of these can do that. Nest can do that. That can maybe you want it to automatically determine what your schedule is based on how you set it after the first week, or maybe you want to program it. They're so much easier than those old dumb boxes that we had on walls, and they will save you a ton of money if you use them right. Just the setback at the end of the night that oftentimes most people forget to do is going to save you a lot of money, because why are you air conditioning your basement when you're in bed? That makes no sense, right? So there's a lot of utility in a smart thermostat. That's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider might be a smart doorbell. Smart doorbells are more and more inexpensive. Ring and Google and a bunch of others make really, really good devices. Ring transformed the space with their smart doorbell. And um, uh, I think August even has one. There are many companies making them, and just the ability to know that there's a box out there and get a notification that, oh, there's a box out there, or I can talk to the person that's at the door even though I'm not home, is very, very useful. You're spending maybe $100, $150 for something like that. if you just want to spend a little bit of money, go for a light bulb. Go for a smart color light bulb. The change in an environment that a color light bulb can make is amazing to me. So one or two color light bulbs in a room or outside or something can just have an enormous effect on the overall ambience in which you live. And I tend to think that that's a very satisfying thing. And you don't get a lot of utility out of it, but it's very satisfying. And it's also inexpensive to get into. Now, you asked specifically, what should I be looking for in terms of compatibility? If they're not Matter compatible, because not everything is going to be Matter compatible yet. Like I said, this is rolling out very, very slowly. Then make sure that it's compatible with your stuff. And by stuff, I might mean that if you already have a Google thing, like a Google speaker, or you use an Android phone, it might be logical then to get one of the products that's made by Google or Nest. If you already have an Amazon Echo or any of those sorts of things, then Ring is a good bet for you. And as far as light bulbs, most of the companies making light bulbs these days are compatible with everything. Just look for the labels. It'll say compatible with Apple, compatible with the A-Lady, compatible with Google. And if it had, even in that case, with something like a light bulb, you're going to take that and use that anywhere over time. So look for something that is as compatible with as many systems as possible, even if they're not the ones that you use. Mass compatibility will only work to your advantage in the future.
Well, this is the kind of thing that you talk about on a regular basis. I want to make sure that people know where to, we're podcasters. I don't know how regular the basis is, but this is the kind of thing that you talk about from time to time at the very least.
Yes.
If you would, please remind people where they can find your shows, where they can keep up with you. Basically, anything that you would want people to find out about, now's your chance.
Sure. Yeah. So the Smart Home Show is probably the most regular show that we put out. I co-host that with Adam Justice from ConnectSense. He is a smart connected device manufacturer, so we bring interesting perspectives to that show. And you can find that at smarthome.fm. Then Home On, I have not been keeping up with as well, but we do have a recent episode out with Allison Sheridan, which was a lot of fun. And we talk about when smart home stuff isn't working that well, and just look in your regular podcast places for that. And occasionally I write at the Digital Media Zone. That's thedigitalmediazone.com.
Richard Gunther, it is a true pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for coming in and enlightening us on the smart bulbs and such. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
All right. Always a joy, Ken. Thanks.